Our children are not safe in our schools. Thousands are at risk every day because of poor school infrastructure. Millions are allocated to fix this every year, but the money doesn't seem to get there. Mind-boggling to think that children are still falling to their deaths in pit latrines. Pupils across the country are forced into dangerous situations where learning is impossible. The Eastern Cape province is the worst affected. So who is to blame for this situation, and how do we fix it? Joining me in the studio is Section 27 Education Attorney Shanice Lindeboom, and Eastern Cape Department of Education HOD Themba Kujana joins me on the line. Welcome to both of you. Let me start off with you, Shanice. Paint us a picture of how bad the situation is.
I saw the images of the pictures that were coming through while I was sitting and waiting, and that's what it is. We've got learners in 2018, 2019 learning under trees. We've got schools with...
Mind-boggling, isn't it?
It's ridiculous. There's holes in the wall so big that you can see into the next classroom. There's no roofs on the ceilings. The pit latrines still being used. Children, like you say, falling into the pits and having to lose their life in a place that they're supposed to be getting an education. It really is that bad.
Themba Kujana, why is it so bad, and why is it particularly bad where you are?
Thank you very much, madam, for the opportunity. Yeah, I think this is a legacy issue. Because if you look at other development, its roots from our past, you can't compare the provinces accordingly. Now, this required a comprehensive, consolidated approach to deal with it. We've done an assessment in 2013 to 2015 of what the situation of underdevelopment is like, especially when it comes to the area of education. We've done that assessment. And that is why we have a two-pronged approach to deal with infrastructure backlog. One is that we've got infrastructure grant as a province to deal with the backlog of the infrastructure. Over and above that, we've got a city, which is where the minister is intervening for us to address this huge backlog that this government has to address from our past.
Okay, let me ask you why this is only happening now. I mean, this should have been happening years ago.
I can give you progress. There is progress. Not that government is not doing anything. Because through our city, more than 160 schools have been built. And I think practically, we must go and see practically where have we built, so that it should not be seen that the government is standing still. I'm giving you statistics to say more than 162 schools have been built, right? And more than 229 schools have been provided with sanitation. More than 369 schools have been provided with water. And what we are saying is that we accept that we have not eradicated everything. Because we must remember that we've got so much of the sisters for us to address the backlog, but we admit that we've not dealt with all of the schools.
Yeah, Shanice, let me ask about the underspending of the budget. So great that it's finally being tackled with, and yes, there's a backlog, but I mean, clearly it's not enough. This should have been done, years ago. Why are they underspending?
We're also boggled by that because there's still so much that needs to get done. There's still so much money that is sent back. I think what concerns us is the drop in the spending per learner that's allocated to learners in schools. I suppose we can only speak to, I think what we've seen is issues of corruption and the mismanagement, implementing partners, implementing agents that come into play, and they're not really sort of being dealt with and held accountable for what needs to be done. So it's things like that we see generally in the news and what's coming up in our government.
Themba, how big a problem is this mismanagement and corruption? I'm looking at some of the figures that headed your way: 300 million for infrastructure, social development, the provision of running water, electricity, sanitation. That money doesn't actually get there, so it's disappearing. It's going off somewhere, and I'm wondering why you're underspending too.
I think we should put things on record. We are not understanding in terms of infrastructure. As a province, we are not understanding. And I want people...
Well, the Equal Education NGO said that you underspent your budget by 415 million.
No, we're not. I want fact. Where have we understood as a province? We have not understood. In fact, we got an incentive grant from national of more than 230 million.
I'm just wondering why you're denying it, Shanice. What do you know about this?
I'm also not sure because, I mean, in terms of how we're working and what we've seen, in terms of the norms and standards that's in place and what is required of the department to implement and put in place, several, for example, pit latrines are not meant to be in schools. Since 2016, they were supposed to be out. But there are still several schools that are sitting with pit latrines in the Eastern Cape, in Limpopo, in so many other provinces. So when they say that we're spending on infrastructure, it's a little bit difficult to try and see what that means.
And I mean, at one school, 4.8 million was set aside to build toilets there. And I think they built something like 9 out of that, which is just extraordinary.
And then you hear news of, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to speak about the Limpopo province, but the stories that were reported about his, the MEC as well, also coming out and having to, the reports of his corruption with the Mvula Trust that was meant to be building toilets for the schools as well. So,
okay, Themba Kojana, tell us what sort of impact this is having on education and students trying to study.
There's no correlationship completely between underdevelopment and performance, completely. In fact, you might have seen that the province of the Eastern Cape produced more bachelors, especially from quintile 1 to 2 schools. You see, so there's no correlationship. The performance of the province has been going up, steadily going up and improving, especially from the poorest schools. Now, where is the correlationship between the two?
I don't know. What is it?
It's proven.
Okay, I'm just wondering. I mean, he's saying it's all sort of tickety-boo and it's going well. We know it's not. So, I mean, how do you have this? How do you move this on if there is this state of denial?
I mean, we've got to just push on and keep hoping that we can try and get some change. I mean, even today, we're trying to engage on another matter in Limpopo where there is a court order in place, and yet the department is still insisting on doing things their own way and not complying with the law as well as the court order that has been put in place. So it's a continuous struggle just to try and recognize. We've had several judgments that have said what the position, what the responsibilities are of the departments, and it has been difficult to try and get them to see and enforce and do what they need to do. And
is it not possible to have some sort of class action to get things moving? Because I should imagine the impact on parents as well is devastating.
No, 100%. I think a lot of the judgments, especially in terms of how we work, we do try and go for judgments that are going to get sort of a greater impact. The judgment that came out in the Eastern Cape itself related to the norms and standards for school infrastructure, and this actually did say that there were certain provisions in the norms and standards that sort of created a legal loophole for the minister and to relying on resources and other departments' cooperation, and this was found to be unconstitutional. So we've just got to try and sit on top of it and monitor and make sure that we are, where we see these issues coming into play, that we address them.
And Themba Kojana, briefly, if you will, what's the conversation that you have with parents who are affected, who have children in schools where they learn outside, where there are pit latrines still?
Can I address the first part to say that we're in a state of denial? The Department of Education is constantly engaged with all the recommendations of equal education. And we have been able to demonstrate to them equal education. It's such that I think Section 27 has not engaged with us proactively so that we are addressing the problem. Instead of us fighting each other to say, this is what needs to be done. Now, with equal education, we've been able to identify the problem and say, with limited resources, we get an allocation of 1.5 billion per annum, addressing a backlog of more than 70 billion. What do? You engage positively and address the situation. And I'm inviting Section 27 to come and engage so that they must not say we are in the state of denial.
Okay, let's leave it there, Themba Kojana, with that invitation to Shanice Lindenboom. Thank you very much. Still ahead, Libya on the brink of a full-scale civil war. Warlord Khalifa Haftar marches on Tripoli, but locally it's reports about former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's stashed billions that are hogging the headlines. First, though, look at the international weather.